Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host, Shellon Washington. Today, we're going to be discussing a very important topic I have discussed before on this show. But today, I'm going to give you additional information on an issue as it relates to divorce. Today, we're going to be discussing how to obtain a divorce where the whereabouts of your spouse is unknown. And I've had this situation happen numerous of times where people they're married and they're experiencing conflict, and then one party decides that he or she is going to get up and leave the marital home and not tell the other spouse where they are relocating to. And this happens a lot in situations where um, the marriage, for some reason, was for the purposes of something else other than love. And I'm not going to list some of those reasons that people get married for in the United States. As you know, this topic is restricted to the state of New York. So if you're living in the state of New York and you're watching this live today and you intend to obtain a divorce from your spouse, but you don't know where your spouse is, you don't have a clue of what you need to do, how you can go about finding that spouse in order to obtain a divorce, then you're in the right place today, because I'm going to give you some valuable information of how you can go about getting your spouse served with the process. If you're intending to obtain a divorce in the state of New York. And like I said, I've had this question multiple times. I've had several situations where people come to Washington law firm and they need to get a divorce. I've had one lady said she's gone to several firms in Manhattan and she have spoken to different attorneys, and they told her, unless you can find your husband, they told her, ma'am, we're sorry, but we will not be able to help you. Fortunately for that woman, she found Washington law firm. She found me, and she and I had a conversation. I told her, it's fine. It's okay. I will make sure that you obtain your divorce. And lo and behold, within the 9 months afterwards, she was divorced from her husband, who she does not know the whereabouts of. He has disappeared for years now. They haven't had a conversation. They've been apart for more than 20 years. The marriage was in excess of 40 something years. And for 20 something years, the parties were separated. She was living, going about her life in the state of New York. And she wasn't aware of where her husband relocated to. So eventually she came and I was able to obtain that divorce for her. And like I said, we're going to discuss it. So let's get into it this afternoon. So you're in the state of New York. You've been married for a year, 2 years. It could be 20. It could be less. We don't know. I don't know. But you will know the exact amount of years you've been married for. And one day your spouse decides that he or she is going to get up and abandon the marital residence and move on, change the phone number, change everything, move to a new state without notifying you that they were leaving and where they were going to be relocating to. Let's say the situation becomes so volatile that the two of you cease to be on speaking terms, and they just left. And I mean, even if you're still on speaking terms, but they just refuse to provide you access to, information as to where they're living, which state they're in, basic information, but maybe you have a phone number. So there's different things we can do in that case. Let's start with the first one. The first one is your spouse move. You and your spouse were living together. They came to this country and they're illegal in the country. They married you just for the green card. Or maybe you didn't know that they were marrying for a green card, but you end up being married to the person. And after a while, the person realized that it's not working out. They decided to leave the marital home. They left and they're gone. And now you're trying to figure out, okay, I've tried looking for this person. I couldn't find them. I tried calling the phone number, no response. And now I want a divorce. But you have a challenge in that you don't have a social security number for that person because, number one, as I said before, the person probably married to get a green card. So you don't know anything much about this person. You don't know enough to have, so you have a date of birth, but that's about it. And as you know, a judgment of divorce in the state of New York carries a social security number. It depends on the county that you're obtaining it in. It may have the full social or it just may have the partial social security number, but it carries the socials, some part of the social. In this case, you don't know your spouse social security number, so you can't go and do a DMV search because, as you know, DMV also issues non-driver's ID. So there's a driver's ID and then there's a non-driver's ID. People may or may not have one or both or none. So if your spouse is illegal, there's a chance that the spouse never obtained any ID or any form of ID from DMV. So if you go to do a DMV search, you will not be able to do it anyway. No social security number. So that's one of the methods you can find your spouse, by doing a DMV or motor vehicle commission search to see if you find that person. Another method would be using the person's social security number to run a credit report search to see if that person's address, current address, is listed there. If there's no social security number, you cannot do that. Neither can you do a voters list search. That's another thing you can do. You could use the voters list and you can search for that spouse. But if there's no social, we can minus all of those things. So now you're basically left with just skip search trace, which is something that a process server can do. As you know, in the state of New York, once you file a divorce, the divorce has to be served on your spouse. And that's the main part of it. Whether or not you obtain the divorce by default, if the person defaults in answering, or if the person enter an appearance and waive their right to an answer, and they still hand the divorce over to you in that manner, or if they enter an appearance and they become contested. But in this case, we're only focusing on the situation where the spouse doesn't even appear. There's no way to find the spouse, so you can't even serve the divorce summons and complaint. So because you don't have basic information about the person. In that case, you only have the option, you do the skip trace search with the process server. The process server on the search can't find them. The other thing is you can check the military records to see whether or not the spouse is registered in active duty with the military or is registered, period, with the U.S. military. And as you know, you can't register with the U.S. military unless you are actually authorized to do so. Either you have a work permit or you decide that you wanted to serve in the military and they find a way to permit you to get a green card or to become a green card holder, or some legal method. If none of those methods exist and there's no possible way, then your other option would be you're going to just have to file a motion with the court. You approach the court on a motion for what is called substituted service. And there's a landmark case in the state of New York that allows for you to actually serve your spouse via Facebook. A lot of people don't know this, but now you can actually obtain an order from the court to serve your spouse via Facebook, any form of social media. You can now, serve divorce pleadings on your spouse. But something else that people need to be aware of: you don't just take a divorce pleading and serve it by a text message or serve it by or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any of those methods without an order from the court. The court must first authorize you to do that. Otherwise, the service is ineffective. And I do have a situation whereby one of my clients came to me and he showed me a text message which the wife used to serve him. Now, that's not proper service. If your wife or your husband attempt to serve you a divorce via text message, unless they have a court order, that service is invalid. And at any time, you can go to the court and approach the court to vacate that order because the court never obtained jurisdiction over you. You must understand that in order for the court to proceed against you in any divorce matter or in any matter as a fact, they must first obtain jurisdiction over you. And the way the courts obtain jurisdiction over you is by first ensuring that you are properly served with service. If you are properly served, receiving the summons and the complaint, then jurisdiction is vested in the court to move against you in the state that you're served. So the divorce is in the state of New York. Everything is operating in the state of New York. That's how you're going to be served in the state of New York. If you're outside of the state, obviously, but the cause of action arose in the state of New York, obviously the court is still going to obtain jurisdiction over you if you're served outside of the state. But the law says in order for the court to even get there, the service must be proper. And if the service is done by text message or WhatsApp or any other method without first approaching the court for an order, a valid order for what is called substituted service, then you don't have a right to serve your spouse by any text message. That service is invalid. And at any time in the future, remember, anytime, because the judgment is now considered what is considered voidable, meaning somebody could go and vacate it at some point on a motion because the party was never properly served. You were given a text message. The court never authorized your spouse to serve you that way. So therefore, that service is ineffective. Okay. But if you approach the court, if the plaintiff approach the court, first of all, ensure that the court authorizes them to serve you by Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, then that service would be considered valid, because now the plaintiff, who is the spouse seeking the divorce, would have complied with a court order in terms of serving you. Now, there's these different methods that the court permits for substituted service, and the social media one, that was the most recent one. The most common one that they allowed in the state of New York is to advertise in the newspapers. And I don't want people to get the wrong idea when it's just advertising in the newspapers. The court has to first authorize that on a motion. And the motion is sort of technical. So I would advise people who are trying to go to represent themselves pro se, and they're thinking, okay, I can go get the motion. The motion is really technical. It's so technical that only a small percentage of attorneys know how to do the motion. I guarantee you, if you go to about 80-90% of the attorneys who do matrimonial in the state of New York, and you tell them, listen, I don't know where my spouse is, I can't find my spouse, they'll tell you, well, I'm sorry, you can't get the divorce because the domestic relations law require that a party must be served personally in order for the court to obtain jurisdiction in a matrimonial matter. That's what they'll tell you. They would not go further into details to tell you, okay, there is a way that you can do a motion for substituted service and still be able to serve your spouse using one of the authorized methods under the CPLR or domestic relations law. Now, the other position that I want to discuss with you, we've already discussed the position where your spouse don't have no social security number. You have to figure out how to serve your spouse. Let's talk about the case where your spouse actually has a social security number, and you could do other things to first try to find your spouse before you go to the motion for substitute service. If the spouse has a social, the spouse is legal in the United States, there's different ways you can use to find that party. The first method is, I was saying before, you could do the Motor Vehicle Commission search or DMV search, and that one would show you an address history. However, if your spouse has moved out of state, New York State Motor Vehicle Commission will not have a current address for your spouse. They will have the last listed address on the driver's license. The other thing you could do is the voter's registration in the state of New York. Again, if the spouse is out of state, would not help you. The skipped trace, that's another thing. Again, spouse is out of state, will not help you again. The last method is you can do a credit report. You can order a credit report from annualcreditreport.com. That's where you get the free credit report. But obviously, you will need to know your spouse's social security number, and you would have to have a current address to even go and get a free credit report. Otherwise, you can purchase a credit report also and try to see what your spouse's current address is. If you're still unable to find a current address on the credit report, then you have to start thinking that the spouse might be in a different state. And if the spouse is a different state, you might need a background search. So you might need to hire or pay one of those background search company that has the search engine that they can locate your spouse in any state based on the social security number. Again, if your spouse move out of the country, that will pose another hindrance to your ability to even figure out where your spouse might be. So where does that leave you? If you've exhausted all those methods and you're still not able to find a current address for your spouse, your next method would be, and before I even tell you the next method, the way you would know that those addresses are not current is if you attempt service first. You got to attempt service on the most recent address that you found on the credit report, the skip trace search, or the DMV search. And then the process server has to do 3 attempts and come back unsatisfied, or tell you that they were informed by the current residents in that property that that person is no longer a resident there. When that happens, then your only other option would be you know for sure that that person is not there. The process server has to provide an affidavit of attempted service. You'll take that affidavit of attempted service, and then you'll probably have to start getting into thinking that you have to do a motion for substituted service because you've exhausted everything else and everything else failed. You can't find the party. Therefore, you need to get a motion, and the motion would allow the judge to grant an order telling you that you can serve your spouse by substituted service via the newspaper, via Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever social media method you believe your spouse is actually present on. But in some cases, your spouse might not even have any of those social media accounts. So that in itself can also pose a difficulty, and you might have to revert to the papers. And the court uses the local newspapers within the locality for service. So in the case of Brooklyn, the courts always use Brooklyn Eagle. If you're in any other borough other than or outside of Kings County, the court will use whatever newspaper that they authorizes it in those particular county. If you choose that method, then you'll advertise for 6 weeks. Your spouse will either respond or never respond. And then if the spouse never responds, you'll be able to go to the court to obtain your divorce on default, because you've made every good faith effort to find the spouse, to serve the spouse, but you were unable to do that. Another method which people can do, but in this method, you will not need a divorce. Instead, you will be considered a widower or a widow if this is your only option. If you've exhausted all those options I've told you in terms of trying to find your spouse, trying to obtain this divorce, because you need to find a spouse to serve them. They have to get notice in order for jurisdiction to vest. Because once you get that order from the court, telling the court you can't find this party, you don't know their whereabouts, you're unable to locate them, you've tried everything, and the court grants you that order, that is valid to vest jurisdiction for the court to grant a judgment of divorce. So that party can't come at no time in the future and go and tell the court, I wasn't served and I want to vacate this judgment. It will not happen, because you already got an order from the court after you attempted to serve your spouse and you couldn't. There's another instance where a lot of people try to evade service. I've had cases where the client said the spouse is trying to evade service of process. That means you know that your spouse wants a divorce, but you don't want to give your spouse a divorce. So what you do is you attempt to evade the process server. So you see the process server outside, you have a doorbell camera, and you refuse to go outside when you see the process server at the door, or you just hide and they keep coming and you refuse to go outside and accept service of process. I know a lot of people have seen this. You've even seen this in movies on TV where a process server turns up at somebody's house to serve them, and they don't want to be served because they don't want the divorce, and they're in hiding. They're refusing to accept it. In that case, again, a motion for substituted service would be best. If you know the whereabouts of your spouse in terms of where the spouse is living, but the spouse is deliberately refusing to accept service of process, you could make that known on a motion to the court. And again, in that instance, the court will grant you an order to do substituted service on that spouse. But people need to know this so you don't get stuck trying to obtain this divorce and you don't know what to do. You're back and forth and you're just stuck in the process. That's what you do. The last method, which I was alluding to earlier, is where everything is a mystery. The spouse is vanished. You have no clue where the spouse is. You don't know whether or not the spouse is dead or alive. There's no indication whether the spouse might still be alive. And there is a possibility that the spouse might actually be dead, but you just don't have any proof. Nobody's ever told you that a body was found, the spouse was found dead or anything like that. You can get an order from the court declaring that spouse to be dead. But there are certain preconditions that has to be met under the statute in order for you to get an order or a declaration from the court under the CPLR 4527, stating that your spouse is no longer alive. In that case, you will not need a divorce. You will not need substituted service, because obviously you will be considered a widow or a widower. That means it vitiates the need for you to obtain a divorce. But in all other circumstances, you will need to obtain a motion for substituted service if you're completely unable to find or locate your spouse in order to serve them with the petition or summons and complaint for divorce. In the state of New York, we say summons and complaint. I know in Guyana, they say petition, but here we say summons and complaint. That's what we use to obtain a divorce. Now, I hope this information will be helpful to somebody who's trying to obtain a divorce, but they just don't know the whereabouts of their spouse. And they're saying, I would really like to get this done. I want to go through with this, but I just don't know how to move forward. I'm stuck. And like I said to you earlier on, a lot of clients have come and they've said, like, we've tried, but we were not able because I spoke with different attorneys and all of them told me, you have to first know where your spouse is living in order to obtain a divorce, which is completely false. Because as I said to you before, you can do a motion for substituted service, which could go in the newspaper, or it can also go on your social media page, and you will still be able to obtain that divorce. Now, guys, thank you so much for staying here this afternoon and listening to today's edition of The Law and You. I hope again that this was helpful and that it will help someone who is looking to obtain a divorce, but they don't know where their spouse is. So this should be information that you need. Or, of course, you can always give our office a call, Washington Law Firm, which is located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. You can always give us a call. The phone number there, 718-877-3100. Give us a call at any time, and we'll be able to provide you with the information you need to obtain your divorce by default if you're unable to find your spouse. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100. Our information is also located on our page, our Facebook page, Washington Law Firm on Facebook, or our website at www.winterlaw.com. You can find us there and find our information. We're also on Google. You can find us there also. So if you're in the state of New York and you're looking to obtain your divorce from your spouse where you don't know your spouse's whereabouts, just give us a call and we will be able to assist you further. 718-877-3100. Thank you guys so much for staying today. This edition today, The Law and You, as we discussed how to obtain a judgment of divorce where the whereabouts of your spouse is unknown. I'll see you again next week at the same time, 4 p.m., as we continue to discuss issues affecting people in the state of New York, New Jersey, and in the country of Guyana. Thank you so much. See you again, same time next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys.